I'm slightly nervous speaking today because I'm speaking on behalf of Stop CSG Illawarra. And I say that because this is an organisation with over 4,000 registered supporters in this community. And I feel the weight of that responsibility. That said, there are other people from Stop CSG Illawarra speaking here today, and I know that they have a lot to contribute to this too. Stop CSG Illawarra is opposed to this modification. So to put it simply, I'm not going to put forward changes to their application that would make it acceptable to us. We are opposed. So we are an organisation which stands for a moratorium on this industry statewide for a Royal Commission. And I want to explain that because it's not arbitrary, it's relevant to this proposal. The coal seam gas industry is still a relatively new industry, and the vast majority of approvals and the continued basis on which approvals are given at the moment flows from industry-provided research. That is, the industry funds this research, the government accepts that research and makes a decision based on it, when there's a financial interest in saying this is safe. There is an enormous and growing amount of anecdotal evidence showing that current CSG extraction practices are unsafe, and I'll go into that more in a minute. There are increasing amounts of scientific evidence that show that this industry is unsafe, again, which I'll go into in a minute. We also advocate a precautionary approach. That is, we need to know this is safe before it goes ahead. We don't want to be in another situation where we've got industry-funded research, like Big Tobacco, like James Hardie, saying this is safe, when communities are feeling the impacts right now, and we need to be doing the research to know what is going on. And finally, I would say that there needs to be an immediate freeze on this industry and a Royal Commission, because the processes under which applications have been granted were inadequate. Our current government says they were inadequate, and there's enormous development scandals currently going on in New South Wales. That should be recognised. The government itself needs to be investigated, so we need a Royal Commission. We need the facts to come in before any more drilling happens. Secondly, we stand for a ban in the drinking water catchment, and that goes for this particular project. Firstly, because coal seam gas mining always involves contaminated water. So you have to draw contaminated water out of the coal seam to access the gas. That water is high in salt, and it can contain toxic and radioactive compounds and heavy metals. Coal seam gas mining also involves methane leaks. This is known, and increasing studies show this, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. Lastly, because the above ground footprint of coal seam gas development, and that includes land clearing, is enormous. Proposals by companies across New South Wales say that for a single well you can have up to 4 hectares of land clearing. How could that be okay in a drinking water catchment? 11 of these wells are in areas so protected that if I walk I can be fined up to $44,000. Yet a proposal has previously been approved and is now being recommended by the government again for approval that will involve land clearing, contaminated water and methane leaks in our drinking water catchment. Now, the industry itself keeps putting forward theoretical models under which this can be done safely. Look, if I show you this flowchart, it leads to this and everything can be done safely. Now, those theoretical models may well add up, but we can't just look at that. We actually need to look at the practice of how this industry is operating. So soil and water testing in the Pilliga in north-western New South Wales found toxic chemicals around coal seam gas sites. There is an assumption from the industry that gas leaks are insignificant. That is, about 0.12% of the gas actually leaks out. But Southern Cross University found significant methane levels at Tara. And I want to say anecdotally, and this isn't scientifically proven, we've now got kids being airlifted out of Tara with symptoms that relate to methane exposure. And yet we're not seeing the testing done in that area. So they found that there was 6.89 parts per million methane in the atmosphere then, when a background level is about 2 parts per million. A Cornell University engineer read through 16,017 inspection reports on unconventional wells and found about 7% leak within 1 year of being drilled. Of course, ageing affects leakage too. That's 7% within 1 year of being drilled. Cornell University found that this rate increases dramatically over time, up to 50% over the lifetime of a well. The reality is that steel and concrete degrade over time. So it's not just the lifetime of the well, 50% over the lifetime of a well. A coal seam gas well, a connection between a coal seam, our groundwater systems and the surface, that steel and that concrete must last forever. And they are materials that degrade over time. Toxic wastewater was released into the Condamine River by CSG companies Origin Energy and ConocoPhillips. This is despite using the current preferred treatment method of desalination. So what we are being told from the industry is that this water can be treated and be made safe, and treated water is being released into the Condamine River with 17 toxic chemicals in it. Now they were releasing 8 Olympic swimming pools per day of this treated water. I don't want to keep going into examples on the ground. I think there's a lot. There's clearly a lot. And there's certainly enough that the government needs to be freezing the industry for an investigation. The next thing I want to talk about is that the recommendation itself from the government is based on an enormous contradiction. So I just want to read from part 4.4. The majority of submissions made by the community and interest groups raise concerns that relate to the coal seam gas industry in general, rather than the request for an extension of time for the drilling and operational phases of this project. The department is generally satisfied that these concerns have been adequately addressed in the course of the previous assessment process and through the existing conditions of approval. And this happens again and again through the government's recommendation. In part 5.2, which is about environmental impacts, in part 5.2.1, which is about impacts on surface and groundwater, and in part 5.2.3, which is about bushfire risks. The government says, we do not need to look at this again, we don't need to make this assessment because this was adequately assessed in the previous approval. Now this is a huge contradiction when we had a government who went into an election saying that the approval processes were inadequate. And I'm going to read 2 quotes from our now Premier Barry O'Farrell. Firstly, he told, as Premier, Alan Jones, on radio, I don't intend to allow, particularly after the drought we went through over a decade, mining or any other activity to threaten water resources. He also said, CSG exploration licences have been granted. In some cases, permission to mine has been granted in areas, frankly, that should never have been on the list. Now that's a huge contradiction. To say the previous assessment process did the research that we needed to do to know that this was safe, at the same time as saying the previous assessment process is enough and, is inadequate. That's an enormous contradiction. The second thing to say is that it actually includes information that is factually wrong. So in section 5.3, sorry, I need to scroll through. It states, the New South Wales Government considers that an increased use of natural gas to meet growing energy demand is important to economic growth in New South Wales. That's based on a false premise. We have been in decline in our energy use in New South Wales. So that is wrong. Saying we will get economic stimulus from this project when we are actually in decline in terms of our energy use in New South Wales. Lastly, I would say that there's something incredibly risky in this. So part of the approval states that fracking will not happen. Now, we've never had from the company, we've heard many times they don't intend to frack, but never that they will rule it out. And we've asked them explicitly to rule it out and they have failed to do so to date. The second thing to say is that zero radius drilling is one of the proposed methods of extraction. This is a method currently being developed by the companies involved. That is, it is completely untested. So this proposal includes a drilling method that is a stimulation technique, like fracking, one that is completely untested, and allowing it in our drinking water catchment. Lastly, I think there are 2 things that you need to walk away from this meeting with today. First is the gravity of your decision. I understand that, in the media, the way the government proposes it, you are just looking at a modification application to something that's already been approved for Apex Energy. But the reality of your decision today is whether or not you let coal seam gas drilling go ahead in our drinking water catchment. And the expectation of this community is that it cannot happen. Apart from all of the reasons I have outlined, it will be irresponsible for you to grant this approval because it will not go ahead. I don't say that lightly, but we have, as an organisation, over 4,000 registered supporters. We have collected tens of thousands of signatures in this community of people who oppose this development. We have now systematically surveyed, by which I mean door-knocked, every house in 6 suburbs: Woombarra, Scarborough, Coaldale, Coalcliff, Clifton, Darks Forest, and over 95% of people living in those suburbs say they do not want coal seam gas drilling to happen in our drinking water catchment, that it should be banned. Stop CSG Illawarra last year actually took a vote, and that was that we would blockade should the drill rig come into our drinking water catchment. An appalling situation where we are actually forced to fight our own government to protect our drinking water supplies. And what that means is that should you approve this, this community will do what is right. This community will ensure that our drinking water catchments are safe and that this project cannot go ahead. And should you approve this, you need to know that it will not go ahead, that it cannot go ahead.